Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you logged in from. Welcome to this discussion on how we see organizations transform enterprise risk and compliance. Delighted to be able to host a couple of our leaders from Genpact, Stein, our Chief Strategy Officer, and Priy, our Compliance as a Service Leader. So to start with, Katie, let me sort of request you for a quick round of introduction of yourself.
Thanks, Subhashis. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Stein. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Genpak. I also have the privilege of working with our service lines, which are the areas of practice we invest in, the ERC being a critical one, and maybe ever more critical this year in 2020, as we've seen some of the trends lend towards a heightened need for digitization and controls. So Subhashis, thanks for having me here.
Thank you so much, Katie. Anu?
Thanks a lot, Katie. Thanks a lot, Subhashis. Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Anu. I've been with Genpak for over 13 years now, and I lead up compliance as a service for the organization. So essentially helping companies across the globe, across industries, be it consumer goods, manufacturing, life sciences, pharma, set up compliance frameworks and run continuous monitoring programs aided by digital levers like AI, OCR, language neutralization, machine learning. So very happy to be in this discussion today. And from an absent side, I lead up the Genpact absent relationship from a service line perspective. Thanks, Subhashis. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Katie. Thank you, Anu. And I'm Subhashis, have the opportunity to lead up Genpact's enterprise risk and compliance service line, significantly focused on driving digital disruption in the world of controls and compliance. 16 years in this role. Prior to this, couple of years with the Global Center of Excellence of EY, and a decade with Anderson, also with the risk advisory function. As we kind of tee this up a little bit on this organization or this part of Genpact, so this is a group of about 700 plus professionals only focused on process, tech, and reg compliance. We do believe that the future of controls and compliance is going to be global controls hub in some shape or form. Whatever be the nomenclature, that's where the world's going to be headed to. And fundamentally what that involves is heightened adoption of digital disruption and use of enabling tools, which is what we'll sort of focus today's conversation on. We have sort of 115 plus global clients, 5 of the Fortune 25, but all of that is a unique delivery model, which is enabled again through digital disruption and digital transformation levers. So a little bit on what are we going to focus on? We're going to try and talk about how is the world talking about risk, automation, and digital disruption. A little bit of perspective from Katie on Genpact's view on our alliances and partnerships. How's the regulator reacting to the evolving risk landscape through the COVID phase, some of our success stories partnering with Absent, and overall our success stories on the partnership front. So with that, Katie, if I could sort of come to you to tee this off. As you go through your leadership conversations, how are you seeing risk, automation, digital disruption bubble up? How has it been playing out in the last 12 to 24 months? And have you seen a change through this COVID and post-COVID phase?
Subhashis, it's a great question. So, reflecting on it, actually last night I was reading investor reports from a number of key software players. And there's one who said something which I think sets the stage, which is digital transformation begins and ends with the customer. And that's something that hasn't changed at all. And so we have to put ourselves in the shoes of the customer. And I think that prior to COVID, there was a great deal of effort and work towards digitization, but COVID and the pandemic has only accelerated that. And I think accelerated the importance of digitization and the controls around that at far more senior levels within organizations. And I'm certainly seeing that with respect to the conversations that we are having. In terms of acceleration of digitization, let me just put that in perspective, which is in this past year in a process like accounts payable, and we all understand the associated compliance and controls around that. We've seen 2 to 3 times the digital implementations that we would have seen in a prior year. And again, I think this comes back to clients asking, why are we doing this task ourselves? So there's a force towards digitization and automation. The second driver obviously has been virtualization. And this is a trend that I don't think will ever really go away. I think we're working in a new environment, and virtualization brings a significant number of new risks with our colleagues and our employees working at home, with our ecosystem partners being connected to us. And we're seeing that with respect to threats such as cyber and otherwise. And so what I'm seeing is within the space of controls, a heightened concern and desire for controls in place, a heightened understanding for digital tools, such as I talked about, to have the appropriate design and controls and monitoring. And then with respect to the other threats, a great deal of scrutiny. We as a leadership team just did our own risk assessment and cyber drill because we've seen so many events over the last year. And so those are some of the things that I've seen emerging, or maybe not emerging, accelerating in 2020. And I think what bodes is a continued acceleration into the future. We're not going to go back.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Katie. So, Anu, as we heard that sort of how leadership's viewing it, how clients are responding to it, you end up working with a host of compliance leaders, some of our external experts who actually themselves have been former regulators, attorney. So how are you seeing the regulators sort of respond to the current environment of risk and also the post-COVID compliance environment?
Thanks, Subhashis. I think the last year was, put immense pressure on companies, because of the lockdown and the pandemic. It resulted in companies still had to meet their sales targets, still had to ensure that they got essential commodities. They still had to ensure that they got good transported across the different geographies. This actually led to companies, bribing government officials, adding in a lot of new suppliers in their database, or bribing customs to actually move goods speedily down custom borders, etc. Now, what the regulators anticipated was, actually that fraud would be on the rise. And what they did was they issued a lot of guidance notes across the entire year, across geographies, stating that they are anticipating fraud and corruption would be on the rise. And most importantly, that they are not on a vacation. They are going to ensure that they step up the investigation efforts to combat bribery and corruption. And what we are presenting here is actually a flow of the different regulators and what their guidance has been. So starting with the US DOJ, they actually came up with an updated guidance note in June 2020, highlighting that how will we evaluate compliance programs when making corporate charging decisions. The SEC, in fact, highlighted that they are anticipating that several FCPA issues will be expected during COVID-19, and they would be investigating. Europe, in fact, was also proactive in issuing guidance notes. So the Group of States Against Corruption, GRECO, issued a guidance note for all 50 member countries, highlighting that the corrupt practices will affect the public as well as private sector. It will be related to bribery, it will be related to procurement, it could be new product R&D, so they are going to be monitoring all these aspects. OECD again issued guidance to all member states saying that they are seeing an increase in the rise of gifts, the increase in the rise of donations without any clear requirements. And they are in fact calling out and seeing that equipment is being pushed speedily through customs. So all that is getting investigated. Similarly, with the Europe Anti-Bribery, Anti-Fraud Office, the OLAF, committed and reinstated that in these times as well, fraud will be uncovered and fraudsters will be brought to justice. And now that we have an ability to look back at 2020, I think all the regulators, in fact, walked the talk. And what I mean by that is, the year 2020 had 12 enforcements by the DOJ and SEC. And what was very interesting in all of those was three main highlights I'd like to call out. One was this was the year of the highest FCPA penalties by financial penalties, which was raised to a tune of 6.4 billion. And two of the highest penalties ever to date were imposed on companies. The first and foremost being to a US investment bank to the tune of 3 billion. And the second was to an aircraft manufacturer, again, to the tune of 2 billion. Then there was a pharma company which got a penalty up for about $300 million. So that's the second important aspect, that the regulators were covering different industries in the last year. All industries were being targeted. There was no particular industry that was left out of the entire scheme. And the third and most important aspect, which is pretty common in these cases as well as in previous years, has been that in most of these cases, disbursements has been a common way through which companies have been routing the bribes, routing the facilitation payments, getting to pay third parties to get work done on their behalf. And as a result of which, I think the time is ripe and companies are looking to embrace digital analytics-led disbursement programs to continuously monitor their expenses, be it AP, T&E, P cards across the globe to manage such risks.
Thank you, Anu.
So with that, Subhashis, over to you. What do you, see? What are the kind of digital enablers that companies are embracing to run and put in place a continuous disbursement monitoring program?
Sure. So I think the first reflection is just the sheer change in how some of the compliance leaders kind of think about this now. As the regulator actually called out, some of you would recollect, this was middle of 2019. There was guidance that came out where they said no compliance officer should ever be in a position where if they asked for resources, they were denied that. And it was one of the clear expectations from the regulator. That being said, I don't think any of the compliance leaders would say they've got increased budgets. So you've got heightened sort of ask from the regulator. The compliance leaders are setting the bars higher. The spend that they can make is still kind of constrained. So how do you do that balancing act? And that's really where we're finding more and more compliance leaders actually talk about driving digital sort of levers, which is how do I drive increased coverage by using all of the digital assets that they can, which could be not just OCR. OCR is one of them where you obviously manage to read much more than any number of human beings could sort of go through in terms of documents, but it's about language neutralization, which allows you to sort of work cross geographies. It's about sort of leveraging artificial intelligence to kind of come up with behavioral patterns, which then allow compliance leaders to hone in on certain sort of transaction patterns, which could be either business units, certain geographies, certain sets of individuals, certain functions within an organization. So more and more, it's about saying, how do I get to potential problem areas, wading through a host of data and cross a wide sort of cross-section of geographies, which, by the way, almost every compliance leader would call out language is a big issue. You're trying to deal with, if you just look at the CPI index countries, you almost every country that you talk about is non-English speaking, right? So therefore, the need to have powerful language neutralization is another thing which digital disruption, digital drivers are helping companies achieve much faster. The regulators also kind of asked for evidencing, and therefore more and more, you don't want to be lost on emails. It's all about smart workflows. So as sort of one looks at most of these discussions, be it with some of our expert panelists, like the former UN anti-bribery panel chair, or some of the global ethics and compliance leaders that we work back with, almost everyone's now trying to develop programs or evolve them to use a lot more of these digital enablers. I think there are concerns around data privacy. There is heightened sensitivity around InfoSec. All of those definitely come up, but the speed at which we see through most of our discussions, compliance leaders being a lot more receptive to digital levers is dramatically different from what I would have possibly sort of experienced when we had these conversations 2-3 years back. So, Katie, moving on to a little broader than just the world of compliance. So from your sort of vantage position, how does Genpact really view alliances and partnerships in its overall vision and strategy? And are you seeing it play, these alliances, are you seeing them play out as clear differentiators for much larger F&A, AP conversations that Genpact's engaged in?
Thanks, Subhashis. And it's a great question, building on what you were just talking about. So let me break it down as follows, which is, first of all, Genpact's differentiation and position in the market. It's probably important to set that stage, which is, we've built over more than 2 decades, deep domain experience in spaces like finance and accounting, and the associated ecosystem around that of controls and compliance. And what that allows us to do is really, at the most granular level, understand the process, how to optimize that process, how to use tools like technology, policy, people interventions to do so. And I think what we've learned over the last number of years is, as digital has been introduced, we've seen many experiences where digital tools have been implemented without being really wrapped and infused in that domain understanding. And many of those have failed. And so we pride ourselves on being number one in the most recent HFS report, Finance and Accounting. And if you actually read that report, one of the things that led us to be number one is voice of the customer. And I think voice of the customer is all about consistently delivering superior outcomes. And so as we think about our strategy and the alliance ecosystem, what we've acknowledged is what we bring to the table really is that business understanding, the domain, and the expert pools who are able to infuse all of the controls and compliance around it. And what we look to our ecosystem partners for is for the best tools and technologies to wrap together with that. And so we always start with a business problem first, and with best of breed technologies through our business partners, we're able to better solve those challenges. So the reason I was sort of laughing, Subhashis, is, words like OCR, smart workflows. I mean, in many ways, some of us have become concerned around, to what outcome are we driving these? Because in this space, if it's just efficiency, we've lost the measure of effectiveness, quality, and control. And so working with partners like Apsen, we're able to actually achieve both. And so we pride ourselves on really putting partners at the center of our ecosystem to ensure that we can deliver to our clients. And then our next generation is really working with these partners all around experience. So these tools can meet the regulatory guidelines and what we need to do, but how we bring them smart analytics, prescriptive activities to heighten the experience for both our business partners and our clients and their end customers is really the end game for us.
Thank you. Thanks, Katie. So, Anu, I think this one's a tricky one. So the world sort of struggled to embrace digital, and now suddenly we are in discussions where you often ask that, do you really need to have any SME around? Do you really need people around? You've got so much technology. You should be able to cover everything leveraging technology. There are tools to read, there are tools to translate, there's machine learning, there's artificial intelligence, there's everything. So do you really need sort of anyone? And we've had these conversations, and I still remember my meeting with one of our Alcobrev clients, and this was the compliance function saying, we're very surprised with your sort of solution because you still need SMEs. We thought it's a world of digital. So question, Anu, therefore to you is, how are you seeing domain or subject matter expertise come together with digital, and how it's sort of the two need to play in tandem to really drive real value?
This question still comes up all the time in all conversations and in most of the conversations that we do. So in fact, again, I'd like to draw insights and references to the recent guideline, which was issued last year by the regulator, because I guess this was something which was perennial, being asked by companies to regulators as well, that, we've put in a digital tool. What else do we need to do? So I'll draw three important aspects from the guidance, again, that was issued by the DOJ last year in 2020 to answer that. The first guidance, or the first important aspect of the guidance that the regulator called out was, the compliance program needs to be adequately staffed to ensure that any exception which is coming up from an analytics platform, a digital tool, is going through a deep dive review of high-risk exceptions to identify the high-risk exceptions. Because, all analytics tool or platforms will provide you the exception, will provide you a layer of 10%, 20%, but reviewing those to identify, which is the false positive, what is the true hit, actually needs a lot of domain expertise, knowledge, background, experience. The other important aspect which the regulator again called out was that it's not just important to identify the exception. What companies need to do today is also do a deep dive root causing of the exceptions to identify what was the reason for the non-compliance. Was it a system issue, a policy issue, a process issue, so that those could be, an underlying action item to remediate those issues could be fit in. And this would result in a change and an improvement in the process policy, which is what the regulator is looking at, and not just an identification of issues and just stopping the process at that. The third most important aspect that the regulator again called out was that a compliance program does not need to be static. It needs to be dynamic always, which basically means that a company needs to learn from the exceptions, learn from the past experiences it's had in terms of non-compliance, also learn from what they are hearing there, or the gaps or control gaps that their industries in the same geography or industries in the same area have undergone, so that they're able to build a robust compliance program which takes into aspect all these previous gaps, etc. And that's where the element of a digitally but a domain expertise led digital program, where where the domain SME is able to bring all those insights and continuously update the analytics program, the continuous monitoring programs, is very essential. So that's the balance, I would say, between domain expertise as well as digital interventions that we bring to the table with our partners. And I think that fits in very well with how we have designed the solution, the Genpact AppZen solution for our clients, which brings in the right mix of both. So what we've done here is, again, as soon as an expense is submitted, there is 100% review by the AppZen analytics platform for the entire underlying receipt as well as the expenses from a policy standpoint. And then the human auditor would take on the work where all the exceptions identified would go through a deep dive review to identify any non-compliance, where the false positives would be approved and the real hits would actually be rejected with the root causing of why and why did it go wrong, what was the reason for the non-compliance. What's even more important is we have gone ahead and provided an additional layer of post-payment analytics to provide an additional element of fraud and regulatory compliance overview. And why this is essential today, is because a lot of times, prepayment would not be able to catch expenses which are, completely, which don't have any red flag because they are approved, because they are in line with the policy requirements, but they would have a red flag, or they would be part of a larger trend or pattern, which will only get identified when you analyze large amounts of data. And I think that will be better explained with the help of a few examples. An employee who has a corporate card, as an example, but is incurring high amount of cash spends, that's a red flag which a prepayment platform will typically have to approve because there's nothing non-compliant in that. Or it could be an employee which is, again, within the limits of a company policy, but incurring high amount of and very frequent spends with a third party or a government official. Again, all within the limits. So, it has to be passed through the prepayment layer, but it is a sign of a red flag. Why so many? Because of the high frequency. It could be other examples of an employee, wining and dining with a third party or a government official or a customer, and recording it in inaccurate codes like employee entertainment or miscellaneous, which would circumvent getting the right pre-approvals or the right due diligence process activated. But when you analyze it in the larger data set, it is part of a bigger investigation or bigger trending that you would want to analyze. And there are other examples, etc., which could be, let's say, an employee trying to circumvent getting a vendor created in the PO process and through the AP process because it would require due diligence checks, quality checks, etc., and hence using that vendor and making the payment to a vendor through a one-time T&E channel to avoid the process of due diligence. So all these are some examples where actually analyzing large data sets is very essential because it helps identify cases of compliance, potential fraud issues, which will get which typically tend to get missed out. And what's the value for the customer? The customer in turn gets to see one global dashboard, which provides him or her a view of, what's the global level of compliance. And then it could be drill down capabilities, ensure that they could actually get down to a regional country employee level view for their consumption. The customer also gets to see action item trackers, which actually provide the root causing of why things went wrong and the action item to close out on those exceptions. And that is the end-to-end view that every customer wants to drive in a behavior of compliance and not just stop at exception finding. And lastly, what they get, is also a series of patterns, a series of repeat offenders, high-risk expenses, spends, etc., which help them identify the high-risk, employees or spends so that they could actually focus on those and make them improve their behavior or patterns in the future. So that's what the entire landscape of, a joint solution that AppZen and Genpak bring to the table, and that's the value we are sort of bringing forth for our customers.
Terrific. Thanks. I know there was detail, but I think that's the reality, that some of this really, that the gem lies in the detail. And I would almost say, if a customer was going to get all of that, why wouldn't you win this almost from every discussion that you have, right? It just sounds so fantastic in terms of what this combination brings. So, Katie, as you sort of again get to view this particular competency or solution from your point of view, how do you see this being one of the sort of key growth drivers for us as a company? And in all of that, how do you sort of see the digital partnership that we have with Absen really being a significant accelerator, if I may call this?
Yeah. So first of all, in the space of strategy, you always try and pick a trend right as it's, at its inflection point, at least in a company of our size and scale. And I think that this, as a service solution, our ability to differentiate by coupling the digital best of breed technologies from Absen with our regulatory knowledge and domain experience as a service is absolutely at the right moment. I mentioned earlier that I was going through about 50 companies' most recent quarterly earnings, and 40% of them talked about as a service models. So I think absolutely the way that we're delivering this and the way that we want to bring value is timely. And for clients, as you said, Subhashis, why wouldn't you want to move forward with the solution? The second thing I mentioned earlier, experience, and I talked about analytics as a core component of that, and the prescriptive nature of those analytics, the visualization, helping to drive the right behaviors and helping our teams to identify root cause issues quickly and ensure that there aren't false positives or false negatives. Again, the solution is built around that concept with both the prepayment and the post-payment efficacy that comes with it. And so I really do think that these two firms coming together in the market in this moment with the solution and the way that it's delivered to ensure that the digital capabilities of a best of breed tool like Absen are relevant to the solution that they're solving for in that moment, and then having data and analytics be at the heart of it with our years of experience of delivering against that, this should be a market that we should see take off and grow exponentially in this moment.
Super. So thank you so much, Katie. So Anu, from a strategic sort of point of view, obviously you heard sort of Katie's view. You've been in the thick of this, and what's been your sort of experience of success stories playing this out? How are customers reacting to it?
Sure, thanks. When we embraced this partnership, we actually thought of two ways to actually make it live in all our clients. One was again the route of any new F&A deal that Genpact pitches in, where F&A is in scope, we will go ahead and pitch the Genpact Absen digital transformation solution. But what we also did was we tried to find clients where Genpact was already servicing, in the T&E space, and we just tried and we wanted to destroy our own revenue by moving away from the FTE approach to a digital transformation solution, because that's where we would bring in value for the client with our digital transformation ideas. And that's actually where we got our first success, where Genpact was actually running an FTE-driven operation for a beauty major for about 10 geographies in the Asia Pacific region. And I'll come to what the as-is situation was. So what we were doing, it was the current situation was it was a FTE manual. It was 100% manual FTE-driven solution, which obviously resulted in a high manual effort, and it was prone to errors. It was based on a random sample-based approach. So there were 20% samples which were being audited, which actually led to 80% of the samples not going through any compliance review. The current process was focused on policy and threshold checks. So elements of fraud, of compliance were actually not being baked in the solution. There were disparate platforms that were being used by the client, and that resulted in a lot of human intervention to extract the data and perform the review. Like I said, it was in the APAC region, so we were dealing with 10 countries, Japan, India, Korea, Vietnam, China. And this also resulted in, the underlying languages that we were working with were multiple in nature. So we had Mandarin, Thai, Korean, to name a few. And lastly, because it was a manual approach, we were providing very basic dashboards. So, the level of interactiveness of the dashboards and the level of exception reporting was very basic. So what we brought in to the customer was an end-to-end managed service solution, which actually brought in the AI layer by Absent, which enabled the customer to get 100% review of all expenses within minutes of submission, from a policy compliance, from an accuracy, from an approval process. And at the same time, we gave the customer additional 100% review of all expenses from a fraud and compliance lens as well. So compliance to acts like the US FCPA, UK bribery, country-specific regulations was also taken care of. What was also interesting is that, so because they were disparate platforms, we implemented an RPA solution in addition to Absent. So what the RPA solution did was it actually ingested data from the disparate legacy systems and transferred it to the Absent analytics engine so that the engine could run their analytics on the data and provide the results. And the RPA moved back as well to move the exceptions back to the underlying data platform. Again, with the language neutralization layer, we were able to handle all the different languages that the client was working on, and hence eliminated a high amount of manual effort because different regions had different SMEs providing language support. And that actually brought in about a 60% efficiency for the 60% productivity for the customer, because there was a lot of automation opportunities that this brought in. And with that, we were also able to bring about 1 to 1.5% of hardcore T&E savings on their spends, because elements of fraud, etc., which were earlier not getting detected, were actually getting detected and prevented before submission, or rather before payout to the employee. So, and with that, of course, the interactive dashboards, which allowed the APAC team to know at a single click what's the compliance health at a global as well as the country level. All those aspects were also built in. So that's where, so the customer was definitely a happy customer at the end of it, because, they got all the value adds, a digital transformation solution with additional elements of risk coverage, productivity, and all the good stuff. So that's essentially what our first customer was, where, we brought in the solution. But I know, Subhashis, you've also, would you like to share of how our joint solution is panning out in China, which is a focus area for both customers as well as regulators alike?
Yeah, sure. And I think, I'm personally sort of engaged on this one so closely, and it's just such an eye opener where I think it takes us back to earlier part of a discussion where we said, domain and technology needs to kind of come together, because every market has such a sort of nuance to itself. And I know earlier one used to think that China market was a sensitive market for pharma companies because some pharma companies had experiences there or instances. But now as we look at it, it's not about pharma, it's actually cross industries. And one of the unique things that we find out there is most companies, or many I would say, don't have corporate cards. It's pretty common. Now, when you normally run these digital tools, and Absent's got a fantastic sort of functionality of being able to pick up the MCC code, which is basically a merchant code. So even if you put it as a meal, but the merchant code was that of an entertainment club, it would pick it up, right? And that works beautifully. But that works beautifully provided you have a corporate card, because that's where you got the MCC code. Now you go to market China, people have personal cards, so you don't have access to it. You've got this whole challenge of fake FAPIO. So you've got to go and actually ping certain databases to figure out whether the supplier invoice is genuine or not. You've typically hear of stuff like data augmentation. Again, Absent's really powerful with its data augmentation, where they go sort of pull data from Yelp, Google, and all kinds of other forms of data augmentation. You go to China, suddenly it's very different. You've got Baidu and you've got Dazhong and you've got all kinds of different sort of apps that you got to suddenly start getting all this data augmentation from. So, while people might think that it's just about language and language neutralization, it's actually about understanding the market, the difference in process, the difference in data sources, different regulations, VAT invoices. The world's been talking about VAT, but come to China and see what a VAT invoice and a non-VAT invoice means from potential fraud and other kind of challenges. It's a completely different ballgame. So I think we're just having a terrific sort of time building this out with our customers for that market. Obviously, Absent's sort of algorithms and absence rule sets are a huge sort of powerful engine that we have. But the team that sort of our local China team, our SMEs who bring in the fraud and reg compliance capabilities, their ability to sort of really get to market nuances and process technicalities are just such an essential that I think if anything, it's China market, which is just sort of convincing me and us, I think as a team over and over again, that this is just about the most sort of powerful combination we could have put together, which is SME or domain-led leverage of state-of-the-art AI that Absent brings. And I think the regulator's been talking about it pre and post both. And therefore it does, I think, tee us up for some terrific success going forward at a global scale, but definitely I'm pretty excited about what China holds for us. So with that, Katie, just want to come back to you for some closing comments on this whole discussion.
Yeah, so thanks, Subhashis and Anu. Thank you for the depth of this conversation and what you've brought to life. I think those case studies at the end there, to me, actually really struck a chord, which is I started with saying, digital transformation is all around putting the customer at the center. It begins and ends with the customer. And I think that one of the things that really struck me in the conversation as you two were speaking is actually understanding the domain and the context of that customer, whether it's the local market nuances, the regulatory requirements, so that one can easily tease out and ask the right questions to ensure that the technology can meet the customer's needs, is where so many digital implementations either succeed or fail. It's really domain and business-led transformation. Oftentimes, I think we kid ourselves into thinking that technology and a lexicon of technologies will solve these problems, but it's the power of the two coming together. And again, I'd reinforce it's the power of the two coming together in a model that I think is just apropos and ripe in the market for us to solve this set of challenges that are only further accentuated in our current environment. And I don't see abating anytime soon. So really excited about this partnership. Tremendous amount of focus and resource from our end. We see this as a significant market opportunity and one that collectively, I think we are really well positioned to have a good go at. So thanks very much for including in this.
Thank you so much, Katie. Anu, comments from you?
I just would like to end by saying very excited with this journey that we have started with Absen, and we're just looking forward to make this a success and bring in a lot of value for our customers together. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie and Anu. Hopefully all of your audience would have sort of picked up bits that are relevant for you, your business, your industry segment, your geography, your challenges, be it AP, T&E, any form of disbursement channels. Obviously, as we build this out, we look forward to meeting most of you, if not many of you, hopefully in person as we get out of this virtual world sooner than later. And if you wanted to reach out to anyone to sort of take any of this discussion forward, those are a couple of contacts. I guess you will pick this up from different sort of website postings off Absen as well. But just for your reference, you've got Anu, who's with us today. You have her contact details, and Marnie, who's our Global Alliances Leader from Genpact. So thank you once again, everyone, for staying tuned into this discussion, and have a great day. Thanks. Bye-bye.